Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And the story I'm talking about today is the final episode of October's Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork. And yes, this is the last horror episode, unfortunately. I was having a good time. Hopefully you were enjoying the different path I took. I know I write horror from time to time, but not as frequent as I have these last 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And that will be the final story as well for another month because I'm taking off November. Not stop writing, I'm going to do NaNoWriMo. If you don't know what NaNoWriMo is, it's where you write a 50,000 word novel, or at least the first draft of one, in 30 days. And I streamed it all last year. I'm going to do that again, at least most of the days. And most of what I write, I have things I have to do, so I will sneak in those shorter streams when I have to, but I'll try to be here as much as I can. So hope to see all of you there who joined me last year. And I'm doing kind of a weird experiment this year. I'll talk more about that, I think, later. But anyway, the story. I'm wearing my Miskatonic t-shirt because I had to tell a Lovecraft story, or a Lovecraftian story. I don't know if I succeeded, but it is in the vein of Lovecraft, I guess. It's at least in the setting of Lovecraft. And I thought about what music I would write, and I went to the late and the great John Carpenter, who composed many, if not all, of the soundtracks for his films, I believe. And the one I chose was The Fog, and it was a synth adventure, let's say. There was a lot of interesting atmospheric things in there, and it had kind of this retro feel that really helped guide me, even though I guess, you know, Lovecraft isn't inherently retro in that way. But I felt it was a good fit. So let us move on and check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled, Who Are They, Mom? It is by Rafael Nascimento, a freelance cinematic illustrator and concept artist out of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, I couldn't go an entire Halloween without doing a Lovecraft story, now could I? So this one is, you can see a little Red Hook sign, and the artist said it was inspired by the story, The Horror at Red Hook, which I haven't read in some time. I actually have no memory of what it's about, so thankfully that didn't inspire this story whatsoever. But let's take a closer look. So first of all, I love this camera angle. Indeed, Raphael is a cinematic illustrator because he has an eye for composition for sure. The camera's low. It's looking up into this window that's lit, and there is a young boy peeking out, and there's a light on inside. And it looks to be early morning or dusk, I guess, either one. But in the foreground, we have these men, possibly women too, standing in these cloaks. And the one closest to us has his hood down, and in his hand, he's holding a hook. There's some interesting symbols on the back of his hand. Clearly, these are cult members, which is, you know, it's very prevalent in Lovecraft stories. There's a bunch of what appear to be ravens kind of flocking onto the roof, so you know something's going down. So thank you, Raphael, for this inspiring artwork. I can't wait to look more into your portfolio. I think that having the eye for composition goes so far in creating a great mood for art. So that said, let's see what I came up with. Walter stared at the dead leaves blowing through the open front door. They screeched across the tile entryway. He ducked behind his father's chair, where the man had grown thin, gazing through it for days, muttering things. Walter pressed his hands to his ears. His mother wept in the kitchen. He couldn't hear it, but seeing it was bad enough, so he turned back to the door his father had left open. Stepping around the dead leaves, he eventually found the knob. A brief shock to his fingertip wasn't enough to scare him away, and he closed the door. It was a silence he'd never experienced before. His mother was no longer crying, behind him on her hands and knees, collecting the leaves into neat stacks. She looked up at him a moment, the down at his hand he'd closed the door with, her face twisted. How could you? Walter kicked one of the stacks and ran upstairs to his room. It was larger than he remembered. The window so far away, the ceiling tall and dark. His breath fogged the air. The window was open, but he couldn't reach it. Instead, he reached for the lukewarm mug of cocoa he'd snuck up after dinner. Melted marshmallows clouded the surface. He shook it. A dark hole formed at the center, white marshmallow arms spiraling from it. He put it back in his drawer and turned the end table around to face the wall. Walter went to bed without undressing. His wool sweater itched. His jeans burned. If he just went to sleep, his father would be back in the morning. A reset, a fresh start. Walter couldn't sleep because he couldn't close his eyes. Above him, growing from the ceiling, a black whirlpool formed. Pinned to his mattress, all he could do was gaze into the many-armed anomaly. His head wouldn't turn. His eyes still wouldn't close. It hypnotized him much like campfires did. And no matter how long he stared, giving himself over completely to the task, he could never find a pattern. But this was different. It reminded him of the creature he'd found in the tide pools last summer. His mother had said it was a starfish, but he knew better. It was too precise, a spiral that seemed to want to twist his head from his neck. He stole it, discovered by his father after they got home. Of sea and stars, his dad had simply said, folding Walter's fingers around his prize. Walter hid it under his mattress until the smell was so foul that he had to throw it out, except when he went to gather it, nothing was there but a black stain. Of sea and stars, Walter said. Tears budded in his eyes. There was more to say. Why couldn't he say it? He felt the meaning, saw the meaning. The starfish shape on his ceiling yawned black. White dots that didn't twinkle, but he knew to be stars, floated in the depths he desperately wanted to fly with, swim with, exist with. Then he found he could move, a single digit, his index finger, and it curled at his side, hooking his soaked bedsheet, fingernail cutting through it even deeper, trying to burrow through his mattress. It found a spring so sharp, and he yelped in pain, jerking upright. He waited for the whirlpool to take him away, his head so much closer to it now. But when he looked up, it was gone. Walter's bedroom door creaked open. Wally? His mother, hall light filtering through her nightgown while she rubbed her eyes. Bad dream, Walter said. She crossed the room. Told you about hot cocoa so late. Walter's face warmed. Did you brush your teeth? His mother asked. She grabbed his blanket, which he'd kicked onto the floor, and pulled it over his body. One finger held the hem, his right index finger. She put her hands on her hips, her face contorted again, just like downstairs. And when he blinked, the expression softened. Then it came to him, a feeling. The whirlpool birthed again in his mind, its arms curling even more to find points, hundreds now. She brushed his hair from his forehead and leaned in for a kiss. He smelled life between her parted lips, writhing, microscopic but there, multiplying until it filled her mouth, and then he saw it. She was a monster, those organisms dripping from her mouth in black tendrils. He lashed out with the only weapon he had, the one bestowed to him by the whirlpool in his ceiling. His finger caught her lip, hooked it like a fish, nail gouging the soft tissue in her mouth, and she slapped it away. She didn't say a word, just stood there, nursing her wound. But her eyes said enough, moonlight casting them in silver. I'm sorry, Walter said. How could you? She said with half her mouth. She stormed out and slammed the door. Walter slept. He woke before morning, pacing his room, restless, feeling his finger locked into that wretched hook, but not dare looking. He shivered, feet gone numb. He tore the blanket from his bed and drew it around himself, continuing to pace. The movement should warm him up. Eventually, he saw his breath. It spiraled before his eyes. The window, closer now, within reach, framed a raven. Silent, still, black orbs looking right at him. He shooed it away with his hooked finger. It fled into the sky, joining its brothers and sisters in a great flock that grew arms, so many, so long, so sharp. At the window, morning peeked over the horizon. The front lawn was more leaves than grass. Among them stood men, hoods drawn over all but one. In his hand, a hook. On his face, a smile. On his breath, words. Of sea, his father said from below. And stars, Walter finished, beaming. He went to get his mother. They had so much to show her. With this story, I really thought about writing like H.P. Lovecraft, and I briefly looked at just some of his writing, some of the excerpts of short stories, and I quickly realized that's just not what I wanted to do. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Lovecraft, a lot of exposition. It's not very action oriented. It's usually somebody who has lived through this experience and retelling the story to you in first person, but not in a very visual way. I mean, of course there's visuals, but it's not like you're watching a film, I guess, for lack of a better way of explaining it. And he's very verbose. He's very purple. His vocabulary is very dense, archaic. I mean, again, he wrote in the late 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. So it was more apt then. My vocabulary is not super hot. So I said, you know what? I will just do this in my own style, because why not? Why not bring Lovecraft to modernity and try to make it a little bit more visual, a little bit more action oriented. So with that out of the way, I proceeded to create the POV character from this young boy who's in the window. At first, I was going with the title, where it was. I have it named incorrectly here. Night Gaunt was another one I was going to do, but Mom, Who Are They made it seem like they were out to get him specifically. These guys were unknown to him. They just showed up on his lawn, and it's a very creepy image. However, I tend to like to tell more human stories, and so that's why I went the way I did. So I created this situation where the boy was luring them, or at least part of them. He was seeing signs. He had this massive like whirlpool or vortex on his ceiling. A vortex is probably a better word in hindsight. We do know that this artwork was inspired by the horror at Red Hook, and there's even a sign that says Red Hook there. And there's a man holding a hook, and so I went with that. I went with using his finger in that regard, almost as if he was being hypnotized. And then, as is very Lovecraftian, and also this kind of was reminiscent of Jeff Vandermeer's The Southern Reach, in which he found something at one time, and he found this strange starfish creature in the tide pool, even though he knew it wasn't a starfish. And that was just kind of a little bit of a backstory or a seed to help make this entire event not just feel like it happened quickly, that it was over a long period of time, as very much many Lovecraft stories are. They're not usually over like one night or one scene. It's usually years or a long period of time, and most of the time the storytellers in his short stories are people in a mental institution. But here something funny happened. I think I was at about the 600-ish word count, and I had a different idea. This does happen from time to time, but rarely do I act on it. This time I did, and luckily it wasn't too difficult to fix it. That's one way to think about when you're writing a story, is that don't be so concerned if you feel like something's not working right away, and then you all of a sudden have a better way to start it off, because there's always ways to fix things. And so the way I fixed it in this one was I was writing it, and I was just about this kid in his room. He saw this strange whirlpool on his ceiling. I started giving him strange visions, and maybe you could argue strange powers, or anyway, he was in a very unsettled mental state. And then I thought, well, what if one of these guys was his dad out here? And in particular, the one without the hood, so he'd be more recognizable. And so that's what I did. I kind of turned this into a strange family drama to a degree. And I think when you do stuff like that, there's just so much more power to it. I don't think I was super successful here, because there's a lot of things. I had a lot of elements that were sort of seeding things and tying things together. If I would have had more words to work with, I definitely would have filled those moments out a little bit more. Like I would have rather had a little bit more exposition about the father, like why he left, when he left. And right now it's pretty quick. I do like the visual of Walter the boy looking at the door, the open door. I think that's a very telling image, right? I just imagine this kid staring at the door. His dad walked out of it. These dead leaves are blowing into the entryway, and it's kind of haunting. I just imagine there's probably a cold breeze coming inside. He doesn't know where his dad went, and so that's what I went with. Very much toward the end of the editing process, I added that he was staring out this window for long periods of time, growing thin, muttering things, which, those are very indicative of a Lovecraft story. And so what I decided is that this father had probably been doing this for some time, hypnotized by something otherworldly. And I also helped sort of seed that back into the story as well, when his dad is the one who allowed him to keep the strange creature, or, quote unquote starfish thing he found in the tide pool. I was using it as a visual device because I like the image of these spiral arms, kind of like nebula. I feel like it's very otherworldly. It's very alien. It has a lot of applications, and it conveniently could be argued that it's, kind of hook shaped. And so I thought that was a cool image to carry throughout. And it's very tentacle like as well. That's worth saying right now as well, is that I didn't, as much as I love Cthulhu and much as I love tentacle horror that Lovecraft has created, I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to go down that familiar road. And when I was looking for imagery, I did find a really nice one where this old fisherman had stumbled upon this Cthulhu temple. Almost did that one, but I changed my mind. And I almost did one called Night Gaunt. Again, changed my mind. You can see I forgot to change the title. But that was my entire purpose, is to try to do something slightly different than what was expected. I mean, I feel like when you think of Lovecraft, you immediately think of tentacles, these, Cthulhu, these strange sea creatures and stuff. And while I did use the sea, and I always loved that aspect of Lovecraft, is there's just something primal and unknown about the depths of the ocean. And I think that's why it works so well. It's really the closest thing we have to us that is alien in nature. We're not made for that environment. We have yet to explore much of it at all, even currently in modern day. And so it just remains to be this strange place. And I always love it when I find articles where somebody spots a giant squid offshore somewhere in the depths. Those are still fun to watch. So that's why I went there. And I think it works for that reason, exactly that reason. That's why Jeff Vandermeer used it in the Southern Reach trilogy, where the lighthouse keeper found this strange object on the beach that completely transformed him and the rest of the world, essentially. So the ocean is a great way to bring sort of an alien, horrific nature into your stories, I think. And Lovecraft knew that clearly. He leaned upon that extensively. And you can see here, I went all the way back to the beginning. This is what I was talking about. It's when I decided to bring his father back into it. I changed the story because the first line used to be, on a brisk autumn evening at precisely 9 p.m., a black whirlpool formed on Walter's ceiling. So I like that line. It's interesting. It's kind of pulpy, but it didn't fit the story any longer. I had this image of Walter in the living room, the front door open, dead leaves blowing in. I even wrote it as a vortex as well early on, and then changed it. And even though I was at 600 words, I had enough filler here to hit 1,000. And like I said before, I could have used more. I could have built on the father's tale a little bit more, made it feel a little bit more obvious what was happening. Just add that connective tissue. I think that's really what the main issue with the story is. I don't think it's a terrible story. I just think it could benefit from more of that connective tissue. And maybe when I go back and edit it, I'll add that in. I will probably remove a little bit of the stuff with Walter in his bedroom. I was trying to build like just a strangeness of it. And I think that's part of why I changed the demeanor of his mother. So she kind of says, how could you, immediately? So that begins to ask questions I don't really ever answer. And I'm okay with that. Her face contorts into a monster, at least from his perspective, and she's blaming him for something. What is she blaming him for? Is it because his father left? What's going on? We never really know, but I think that's fine. I did, however, keep the section where I was talking about he smelled these strange organisms in her mouth, and my thought at that point was to create a monster out of the mother. Not a literal monster, just he perceives her as a monster, and that was a way to illustrate that fact, showing Walter's perception. And I think that's really a powerful thing you can always do in your writing. Is it doesn't matter what really is, it matters what the point of view character feels. That is so crucial, because we're not always in our right mental state emotionally, physically. A lot of things can affect us, and then the way we perceive the world is different. And so that's really what that was. It wasn't necessarily that there were these nasty, bacteria-like creatures like spilling out of her mouth. It was really to show his mental state and how he viewed his mother, because, as you know, he was somewhat in cahoots with his dad, and so it was kind of that link, a link that was seeded far earlier, last summer specifically, when he allowed Walter to keep that strange starfish-like creature and keep it from his mother. A dad like handing the son the mason ring or something and not really giving him much context, almost like rather than telling him what he needed to do. And, presumably the father was already going mad or researching things at this point to drive him down this path. But he wanted his son to discover it. Maybe he saw something in his kid that would lead him to the same spot, and he just needed time. And so his dad gave him time, and that's exactly what happened. Why his dad left that night, I don't know. I guess it was to gather the rest of them. I probably could have done a little bit better with creating the mother as an antagonistic force. I think there's some strange contrast there when Walter's in bed and then she comes in and things seem back to normal somewhat, even though when he left not too long ago she was blaming him for something. I do turn that scene pretty quickly, and I remind the reader that her face returns to the same contorted mess that it was downstairs, and then follow that up with the perception of her as being a creature essentially. But I think ultimately that's what I wanted to do with the story, is create a situation where it was from the point of view of the bad people. I guess it depends on you look at it, but little Walter, he just found some stuff. He was being pulled into it. He was being hypnotized. He was being brainwashed, I guess you could say, by some force that also took his father. But rather than making the mother a comforting figure, which I began with, that's exactly how I started it. I turned her into the antagonist, and that's why at the very end they have so many things to show her. If I went back and if I had more words, or perhaps it's still possible, I just need to cut some other things, I would build that idea of the mother up. I would kind of show her kind of flip-flopping back and forth between this monstrous character to someone more nurturing. And then also add some stuff, a little bit more about the father. I do like how he's very mysterious, and there's really not any indication of why he left, but I still feel like there's something else I could do there. And then again, the connective tissue to bring it all together, to link, have more of a realization at the end of his father, and maybe have him answer some of his own questions he had previously. But, alas, I didn't have the words to do it, and so this is what it is. And after reading through it again, it's not too bad. I remember when I finished this, I was pretty disappointed in myself. Maybe it was trying to write a Lovecraft tale and just failing miserably, because I really appreciate what he's brought to the creative writing space. But I just don't know. All stories can be better. So definitely some things I learned here. It took me a little bit of time to get going. It took me a little bit longer than usual to finish it. But again, I stopped myself at about 600 words, went back, changed the trajectory of the story, because again, I didn't really know how this was going to finish. And then once I added his father to the equation, I kind of thought that he and Walter would regain this connection and then go seek their destiny, which was apparently to kill the mother, I guess, and who knows, maybe everybody else. I guess my one regret, or the one thing that I did here that I usually don't do, is I feel like I wrote a very different story than what was implied with the title. The title implied to me that this kid was absolutely clueless as to who these people were outside his window, and then looking to his mother for answers. That I did not do. So the title may feel a little bit clashing. I don't know. I think, or maybe it's ironic. I guess I'll go with that. But yeah, here I am approaching 1,000 words, dialing this in, and it's funny, man. Those last 100 words, the first 100 words, it's strange. It seems like it takes a really long time. I'm looking down at the word counter periodically, and I see 100, and I'm like, man, I feel like I've been writing a long time. But those last 100, I'm like, God, I wish I had more words. But it makes sense. I mean, that's when the story is coming together and you know where it's going. And so you know how it's going to end at this point. And so more words are always better. However, again, I'm very gracious for the fact that I chose to do this, because working in constraints with these constraints has been super beneficial for me. It's allowed me to really kind of dial in what is needed, what is not needed, and really kind of sharpen the prose. And finally, at the end, I am showing the connection to the father. They finish each other's, the line that he spoke so long ago. Well, not that long ago, I guess a summer ago. And I'm finally seating in mention or stating the fact that they had so much to show her. I guess too, I wish I would have had a little bit more, maybe of the kid's madness going through. Like he was definitely drawn to this strange thing and his crazy hooked finger. But I feel like showing his madness would have been a benefit. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I'm so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I learned, what I didn't like, what I liked, and I talk a lot about this in more detail and rambly detail during the writing. But I'll try to distill it down somewhat for this end for those of you who don't want to go through the grueling process of listening to me think out loud very sloppily. But you will know that I changed my direction of the story about halfway through, a little bit over halfway through, and I wanted to bring another person into the tale, and that was the father. I decided to place him literally in the frame as the bald man, sort of closest to us, the one without the hood, and create this link between him and his son. And I seeded that through with some creature he found in a tide pool, right? That seemed to be a starfish, but wasn't. Or maybe it was, and they were all just mad, and none of this is really happening. I think that's a different way to look at it. And I think I did that because I'm always drawn to a human story, right? I feel like those are the most powerful ones. Those are the ones I try to tell because I feel like those are the ones that resonate with people the most because, you know, we're all human, most of us, hopefully. And the beauty of that is it can be in any setting, it can be in any genre, and you can have a lot of fun with it. And I feel like you're really going to connect with more people. I like that aspect of it. I like some of the mystery of it. What I didn't like is the fact that I think it was lacking some connective tissue. So I established that the father had left for some unknown reason. I established that there was a strange connection, something that his father knew about this starfish or what was going to happen. And he was allowing his son to discover what that was on his own. And I turned the mother into a monster. So I think it was about trying to subvert expectations to a degree, right? When I first started writing the story, I had the mother as the typical nurturing mother, right? She was there to help him out. She was there to allay any fears. He had a bad dream. He was seeing weird stuff on the ceiling. And so she popped in to put him back to sleep and comfort him. And then I turned her into a terrible woman, at least from his perspective. And I think that's really what I learned here is the power, again, of perspective, because the mother was really depicted exactly how Walter perceived her, right? Maybe not how she really was, but how he perceived her. And I'm sure we all have memories as kids, and we revisit places that seemed one way, and we see them presently. They seem very, very different, almost as if things had just drastically changed in impossible ways. And so that's what I always think about when I'm writing from perspective of a character. And when we saw sort of the monstrification of the mother when he was in his bedroom, that wasn't literal. That was just how he was really perceiving her. And that was kind of, I guess, the seed of his madness, right? His beginning madness. And that's another thing I really should have emphasized more, is the child kind of giving himself over to this force. So when he finally is drawn to that window and sees his father out there, that connection is complete. And I think them finishing each other's sentences is what we wanted. It's that what I wanted. It's a nice, clean finish, but I could have eased Walter into the madness, I think, a little bit better, or made it a little bit more clear, because I think that's definitely lacking. And like I said, I really toyed with the idea of writing in Lovecraft style. However, I don't know if that's really in my wheelhouse. He writes very, very long sentences, uses very, very big words, and that's not my strong suit. I feel like I'm a much more visual writer. I try to use an economy of words, which I've learned a lot in this series, and not try to get too flowery. Lovecraft was a gardener, let's say, with his words. I love his work. He's by far, he's probably my favorite writer. He really changed my perception of what fiction can do, I think, at a young age. But he wrote at a different time, and now writing has changed quite a bit, as it tends to do. So I decided to embrace my own style and just go with it, and try to at least create the atmosphere and the tone of Lovecraft without writing exactly like him. Maybe that's an experiment I will try out, I don't know, sometime in the future. But that is it for me. If you'd like to support the channel, give me a like if you like the video. Subscribe if you like story-related content. Check out my longer form books in the description below. Oh, I have a proof. I know I've been talking about this book for a long time, but here's the proof for the song, A Song for the End of the World. So I think I might brighten up the graphic a little, or the cover art a little bit. It's kind of dull because I forget when you get matte covers printed, they're not very jet black. They're kind of a dark gray. So, but that will be coming out very soon. I mean, see, it's real, guys. I'm not lying. There's words, there's chapters. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. Just got to do a little bit of tweaking. There's some typographical things in there. And that's it. So keep a lookout for that. And if you are a writer friend of mine who watches this channel, I'll see you live starting Monday for NaNoWriMo. So I have no idea what I'm going to write. I know sort of the concept of what I'm going for, but from a narrative standpoint, there's nothing there. So it'll be interesting. Last time I did a pretty solid outline before I started, and it helped immensely. But this time I'm going back to my roots, man. I'm just gonna wing it and then see what happens, much like I do with these 1,000-word short stories. So thank you, and as always, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next month, I guess, unless you join my stream. All right, thanks again. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.